Well, former Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, Sir Peter Fahy, joins us now. Good morning, Sir Peter. Thank you for joining us. Do you think the Home Secretary's comments earlier in the week helped cause some of those scenes that we saw in London on Saturday?
Yes, I do, and I think a lot of the police think they will. Undoubtedly, there was a lot of debate about this protest and Armistice Day before the Home Secretary's article. But the fact that particularly she said the police were biased and suggested the police were biased against right-wing protesters, I think probably did encourage more of those characters to turn up on Saturday. And from their language and the violence they use, they seem to think it gave them license to be even more extreme. And clearly, as a result of that, officers were injured. But I think now the police have to move on. They've now got to start preparing for next weekend, cancelling rest days, getting more officers ready. So the politics may continue, but for officers on the ground, they've got to deal with the situation as they see it.
So, Peter, welcome to Talk today. Lovely to speak to you again, my friend. I was listening to an interview that Julia Hartley-Brewer did at the back end of last week, and the person she was interviewing was talking about the police and how they must feel. OK, so we saw the police injured, we saw them overrun, we saw them pushed aside. Douglas Murray said, and I quote, "You look at some of the police and you wonder whether they've just not had enough, that they don't have the power." But the critics would say they treat different people differently. Now, I'm not for one moment saying there aren't fantastic thousands of policemen and women. Are the police being let down by the government, or have the police got their own agenda? Because it is fair to say that they were stronger during lockdown on people making those demonstrations, and it was pointed out earlier by Tom Slater, the Black Lives Matter protesters got a different response. Where does that come from? That's not from the government, that's from the police itself, isn't it?
No, I think, Jeremy, there'll be a lot of resentment about those comments about what happened during lockdown and Black Lives Matter. As Priti Patel said to the COVID inquiry last week, there was complete confusion in government about the way that legislation was put together. And there was a lot of confusion about how lockdown legislation applied to protest. And that made the whole issue of dealing with Black Lives Matter much more difficult. I think there'll be a lot of resentment in the police about those comments. As you say, officers have been injured. Officers try and do their best. They're not interested in politics. They don't, they try and act without fear of favour. But they have to act often in the heat of the moment with all the complexities of the criminal law. And again, I think, there's a danger that some of the government ministers are making that appear oversimplistic. There is nothing in criminal law, for instance, that says using one particular set of words is against the law. It has to be viewed each case at its own. What was the intention? What was the impact? And of course, it's up to anybody that's arrested to say, well, I didn't mean that, or I meant something different.
And Pete,
this is causing a lot of resentment in the police. I think the police feel very unsupported. And a lot of the police chiefs particularly feel under huge pressure because of this, level of political control and the danger that the public are given a misleading view of what the criminal law actually says.
And the bottom line is, and you said this to me earlier, Braverman could have called Samart Rowley in and done it privately. She did it publicly. Interestingly, just on Times Radio, James Heappey, the Minister for the Armed Forces, was asked whether her words incited difficulties for the police. He said, I wouldn't have used some of the words that the Home Secretary used in her article, but I also think it would be incorrect to say that those protests, the counter-protests, were entirely a consequence of what she wrote. Tommy Robinson and the EDL thugs were planning their counter-protests well before the Home Secretary published that article. What you're saying, Pete, which is right, is we need to give the police the tools to deal with these thugs, whatever side of the political spectrum they come from, right?
We do, but we also got to be careful that legislation will never solve it. There is a huge issue of anti-Semitism in this country, and the police can play their part. But, overall, the criminal law and policing can't solve this. And you can absolutely ban marches and processions, Jeremy, but you can't ban static protests. And the trouble as well is if you do try and ban things, then the fact is probably people will still turn up and the police will have to deal with that situation. So again, we've got to be realistic. Yes, absolutely. In some cases, the police do need more powers. But the fact is you can't solve this just through legislation. And as I say, even if you did try to ban marches, and there is a power for the Home Office to ban marches, but the fact is, people can still turn up, have a rally, people can turn up for a counter rally, and the police are still faced with that operational situation. And that's really the sort of complexity that the politicians need to be honest in reflecting.
Absolutely. Well, Sir Peter Fahy, thank you so much for joining us. Well, joining us in the